You won't realize it at first, because they don't hit you. They hold you. They don't yell, they whisper, but by the time you notice you've changed, you're already gone. Not all wounds bleed. Some call you babe. Some say I love you while pulling the strings that strangle you. They didn't scream. They didn't raise a hand. But they made me question who I was, one subtle word at a time. Have you ever looked at someone you love and seen? Something else staring back? Not them. Not you. But something twisted. Something you can't name. It starts quietly. An accusation that doesn't make sense. A joke that cuts a little too deep. A fight that ends with you apologizing for things you didn't do. And then one day you realize you don't recognize yourself anymore. Carl Jung called it shadow projection. When a person refuses to face the darkness within themselves, they cast it onto others. And if you're close enough, if you care enough, you become their canvas. Their blame. Their emotional scapegoat. At first I didn't see it. I believed them when they said I was too sensitive, too selfish, too dramatic. And when I started to feel like a villain in my own story, they nodded, as if to say, now you finally get it. But I wasn't the one they were fighting. I was just standing in the spot where their shadow landed. Jung said the most dangerous psychological mistake is the projection of the shadow onto others. Because when someone makes you their enemy, they no longer feel responsible for their damage. You become the container. They become the victim. And in their version of the story, hurting you becomes self-defense. And here's where it gets more dangerous. I didn't leave. I tried harder. I loved deeper. I started fixing problems I didn't create, carrying guilt that didn't belong to me. Because some part of me recognized that shadow. Maybe because I hadn't fully faced mine. Maybe because pain felt familiar. Maybe because I thought love meant saving someone else, even if it meant losing myself. That's how it traps you. Not with cruelty. With confusion. There's a story, less known than it should be, by Hans Christian Andersen. It's called The Shadow. In it, a man's shadow detaches from him and becomes its own person. Years later, the shadow returns. Charming. Powerful, manipulative, and it slowly overtakes the man, convinces others that he's the real one, and ultimately destroys the original. That story isn't just a metaphor. It's a mirror. Because that's what it feels like when someone projects their shadow onto you. You start to disappear. You lose your clarity, your identity, your ground. Until you're left defending yourself from a version of you that doesn't even exist. I thought I was in a relationship. I was in a war. I was loving someone who only loved the idea of blaming me. The first red flag isn't shouting or violence or betrayal. It's when love starts to feel like a courtroom. When everything you do is twisted. When no amount of explaining makes you innocent. When you are always the villain and they are always the victim. That's not love. That's a projection. And the way out isn't louder arguments or more proof. It's recognition. It's stepping back from the image they've painted and asking, whose shadow is this? And why am I wearing it? Because if they can't see you clearly, no matter how close you stand, it's not about proximity. It's about projection. And if the mirror keeps lying, break it. Don't waste your life trying to prove you're not the monster in someone else's nightmare. Wake up and walk away. I used to laugh louder. I used to sing in the car. I used to wear yellow. Then one day I caught myself choosing silence over honesty, picking clothes I didn't like because they wouldn't trigger a comment, laughing in smaller doses just in case it came off the wrong way. No one told me to change, but I changed. Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask we wear to survive in society. It helps us function. It smooths the edges. But in toxic love, the persona stops being a choice and starts being armor. Not to protect ourselves from the world, but to protect the relationship from who we really are. They didn't say stop being you. They just punished me with subtle things. A sigh. A joke. A look. Enough to make me recalibrate. Just slightly. Just enough to avoid rocking the boat. And before I knew it, I was gone. Not all at once, but piece by piece. I stopped sharing certain opinions. I stopped reaching out to friends. I stopped asking for what I needed. I called it compromise. I called it maturity. But deep down, I knew I was becoming smaller to keep the peace. At first, it feels like a choice. Until you realize the choice has become a habit. Then a rule. Then a cage. Jung once wrote that the persona grows fast to the skin and becomes difficult to remove. I didn't realize I was wearing a mask until I started suffocating in it. There's a story, the original version of The Little Mermaid, not the one we're told as kids. In it, the mermaid gives up her voice to be with the prince. Every step she takes with her new legs feels like knives. She lives in agony. She sacrifices everything, her family, her voice, her comfort, just to stay beside someone who never really sees her. In the end, he marries someone else. And she dissolves into sea foam. That story stayed with me, because that's what a toxic relationship demands. Your voice, your pain, your truth. All for the illusion of being chosen. But I wasn't chosen. I was tolerated. As long as I stayed small enough not to disrupt the story they were telling about who I was supposed to be. There's a moment in these relationships, quiet, almost forgettable, when you realize you no longer make decisions for yourself. You think, would they approve? Will this start a fight? Will they say I'm selfish? And the moment you ask those questions before you live your life, that's the moment your persona has replaced yourself. That's the second red flag when you begin to perform instead of live. When every choice feels like a calculation. When your joy shrinks to fit inside their comfort. Let me make this clear. You don't owe your survival to someone else's preference. You don't exist to make someone else comfortable at the cost of your own aliveness. If you're erasing your truth just to keep the relationship intact, then what you're keeping alive isn't love. It's performance art. And the final act always ends in silence. If that's where you are, I want you to hear this. You are not a mask. You are not a role. You are not the shape someone else finds easiest to love. You are meant to take up space, to speak, to need, to be. And any love that asks you to vanish was never love to begin with. It didn't feel like danger. It felt like destiny. They said things no one had ever said to me before. That I was rare. That they saw into me, not just at me. That what we had was beyond normal. Cosmic. Fated. And I believed them because I wanted to. Because I'd been waiting to feel that kind of electric, total, all-consuming love. The kind that rewrites your life. But here's what I didn't know. Sometimes the thing that rewrites your life erases you in the process. Carl Jung warned us about this. He called it anima and animus projection, the unconscious ideal of love we carry within us, shaped by childhood stories, unmet needs. When we meet someone who reflects that image, we don't fall in love with them. We fall in love with our own unfinished longing. It's not love, it's enchantment. And enchantment always comes at a cost. At first it feels like merging. You stop saying I and start saying we. You stop doing things alone because why would I when we can do it together? You stop calling your friends back because they don't get us. You stop making decisions without their voice in your head. And before you realize it, your world has shrunk down to one person. That doesn't look like control. It looks like passion, but passion that isolates you is just possession with perfume on it. There's a myth, almost forgotten now. Merlin, the wise wizard, falls deeply in love with a young woman named Vivian. He teaches her everything, his power, his secrets, his essence. And in the end, she traps him. Depending on this version, he's sealed in a tree or a cave or a crystal, conscious but voiceless, present but powerless. I know that myth because I lived it. I handed over my voice, my decisions, my magic, and when I needed it most, I had no way out. Just the echo of who I used to be. And they weren't evil. That's the hardest part to explain. They didn't trap me with malice. They trapped me with adoration. They said, "I've never needed anyone like this before." And I took that as a sign of meaning, not a signal of danger. But needing someone to be your everything isn't love. It's hunger. And if you mistake it for devotion, you'll spend your life trying to feed something that was never yours to carry. I remember sitting across from them once, same room, same couch, same faces, and feeling 1,000,000 miles away. I'd given them everything, and still they were starving. Still I wasn't enough. That's when I understood I had fallen for an image, not a person. And they had fallen for what I represented, not who I really was. That's the third red flag. When the relationship becomes a stage, when you're cast as the savior or the muse or the perfect soulmate, and you're not allowed to step out of character. When they say things like, "I don't need anyone but you," and it sounds like romance, but it's really a warning that your world is about to close in. Because no one is supposed to be your everything. You're not a fantasy. You're a person. And anyone who demands that you become a dream is asking you to disappear the moment you wake up. You were never meant to be the oxygen for someone who refuses to breathe on their own. So if it feels like a spell, ask yourself, what part of you is under it? And what part of you has already vanished? You don't owe your life to someone else's illusion. Especially when it starts to feel like a mirror reflecting a version of love you've been trying to earn since before you even knew your own worth. Real love doesn't need to consume you to complete you. It lets you stay whole. It lets you stay you. It was always the same fight. Different triggers. Same story. It would start with a look, a word, a forgotten call. Then came the silence, the retreat, the explosion, the apology, the tears, the promises, the reset. And then it would happen again. At first, I thought we just had bad communication, that we both had trauma, that we were learning, but what we were really doing was performing. The same scenes, the same roles over and over again. Until the script was memorized. Until I knew exactly when to brace, when to soothe, when to blame myself. And somewhere in that cycle, I stopped noticing the repetition and started calling it reality. Carl Jung called this a complex, a loop written by the unconscious. Something we reenact without knowing. A trigger-response pattern that drags us backward even when we think we're moving forward. He said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That hit me like a confession, because I thought I was in a relationship, but I was actually in a reenactment, and the lines weren't mine. I was playing a role I'd rehearsed since childhood, the fixer, the redeemer, the one who holds everything together no matter how much it hurts. They were playing the wounded one, the misunderstood one, the one who needed saving. Neither of us was present. We were just echoes. There's a moment that haunts me. We were arguing. Again, over something small that spiraled into something huge. I said, I can't do this anymore. And they said, you always threaten to leave. That's when I realized I wasn't reacting to them. I was reacting to someone else. A voice from years ago. A wound I thought I'd outgrown. I wasn't just in a toxic relationship. I was trapped in an emotional inheritance. That's how it works. You keep choosing people who remind you of where you've been, hoping that this time it'll turn out differently. That this time you'll be seen. That this time love will heal what hurt you. But you can't fix the past by bleeding for it. There's a myth, Sisyphus, cursed to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity. Each time he reaches the top, it rolls back down. That's what these relationships feel like. You think you're almost there. Almost safe. Almost healed. And then it crashes. Again. The fourth red flag isn't chaos. It's repetition. It's when love starts to feel scripted. When every apology feels like déjà vu. When you can predict the downfall with terrifying accuracy. When peace is the pause between storms, not the ground you stand on. That's not fate. That's programming. And you're not here to spend your life repeating someone else's tragedy. You're here to wake up, to rewrite the lines, to break the curse. Even if it means walking away from something that once felt familiar enough to be called home. Because if the only thing keeping you there is the hope that this time the ending might change, it won't. Not until you do. Before I understood the manipulation, before I could name the pattern, before I realized I was shrinking just to stay, something deeper was already speaking to me. A feeling. Not a thought. Not a theory. A feeling. It was a flutter in my stomach that felt more like warning than excitement. It was a stillness in the air after a conversation that should have felt normal but didn't. It was the way my heart pounded when I saw their name light up my screen, not in joy but in dread. And I didn't listen, because I was taught to doubt myself, because they called me anxious, because society calls it emotional, because we're told to be patient, forgiving, understanding. So I brushed it off. I said I was overthinking. I convinced myself I was lucky just to be loved. But love should not make your nervous system feel like it's under siege. Carl Jung believed the unconscious speaks to us not just through dreams, but through the body, through tight jaws and clenched fists and sleepless nights, through the quiet pull in your gut that says something isn't safe even when nothing looks obviously wrong. And yet we ignore it, because intuition is quiet, while manipulation is loud. I remember standing in the kitchen after one of those small fights, and nothing had exploded. No one had shouted. But my hands were trembling. My mouth was dry. I felt like I had just escaped something, but I didn't know what. That was the moment my body started telling the truth. But the mind... The mind is a master of excuses. I told myself they were just stressed. I told myself I was being too sensitive. I told myself that discomfort is normal in relationships. That's how it keeps you. Not by force, by self-betrayal. There's a story buried in the old fairy tales. A young bride marries a man with a blue beard and a grand house. He gives her the keys to every room, except one. When he leaves on a trip, curiosity overtakes her. She opens the forbidden door and finds the corpses of his previous wives. That one locked room held all the truth she was told not to look at. That story isn't about violence. It's about intuition. Because we all have a room inside us that holds the truth we're afraid to face. The signs we saw but didn't name. The dreams we ignored. The tension we swallowed. The nights we couldn't sleep but didn't know why. Toxic love doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers so quietly that the only part of you that hears it is the body. The fifth red flag isn't a dramatic betrayal. It's the quiet dying of your instincts. It's waking up tired for no reason. It's feeling a weight on your chest that won't leave. It's your smile becoming a reflex instead of a feeling. It's your soul checking out long before your body does. And still you stay, because it's not bad enough. Because no one else sees it. Because they tell you it's normal. Because you've learned to treat survival as a form of love. But the body never lies. It warns. It aches. It breaks. And eventually it stops whispering. It starts screaming. In anxiety. In panic attacks. In illness. In full-body shutdown. And even then some of us stay. Because we forget that peace isn't supposed to feel like relief from chaos. It's supposed to feel like calm from the start. If every cell in your body tenses around someone you love, that is not love. That is warning. You don't need to wait for proof. You don't need another broken promise or one more sleepless night. You need to remember that your body has been trying to save you long before your mind gave you permission to leave. Listen to it. Because when the nervous system starts writing poetry in symptoms, that's not sensitivity. That's survival trying to be heard. And it's not too late to start listening. I thought leaving would be the end of something. The end of the love. The end of the story. The end of what we were trying to build. But I was wrong. Leaving wasn't the end. It was the beginning of remembering who I was before I started calling pain love. Carl Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming whole. The real work doesn't begin when the relationship ends. It begins when you stop seeing yourself through their eyes and start looking into your own. When you gather every fractured part of you that was scattered trying to keep the peace. When you pull yourself back from the places you abandoned just to be loved. Leaving was the doorway. Coming back to myself was the journey. I had to grieve the version of me that tolerated what I should have walked away from. I had to sit with the shame of how long I stayed. I had to forgive myself for all the times I betrayed my own knowing because I was more afraid of being alone than being destroyed. But with every day I started hearing my own voice again. Not the voice that asked for permission. Not the one trained to apologize for existing, but the voice underneath. The one I forgot I had. And then something even more surprising happened. I didn't just feel grief. I felt relief. I didn't have to explain myself anymore. I didn't have to brace myself for the next shift in mood. I didn't have to decode texts or manage silence or prove I was worthy of love every single day. There was just space to breathe, space to feel, space to exist without shrinking. That's the moment I knew I wasn't going back. Because once you taste the clarity that comes from stepping away from chaos, you can never again convince yourself that noise is love. There's a quote from Jung, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." I didn't understand it when I was trying to fix them. I didn't understand it when I was trying to save the relationship. But I understand it now. Becoming who you truly are means letting go of who you had to become to survive. It means loving yourself enough to choose discomfort over dysfunction, silence over chaos, self-respect over the fantasy of being enough for someone who never chose themselves. It means breaking the pattern so it doesn't pass through your future like a curse. You are not broken because you stayed. You are brave because you left. And if you're listening to this with tears in your eyes or your breath caught in your throat, wondering if you're strong enough, let me tell you, you are. You are not the villain in their story. You are the hero in your own. And now it's your turn to write the next chapter, without shrinking, without apologizing, without erasing any more pieces of who you are just to keep someone else whole. If this spoke to something in you, write it down. In the comments, in a journal, in a voice memo on your phone. Let it live outside of you. Let it be seen. And if you know someone who's still inside that story, share this. Sometimes the words we don't know how to say are the ones that save us. Because healing doesn't start with closure from them. It starts with truth from you. And today you told the truth.